Welcome back, car and tech fans, and welcome to another garage tinkering video. Before we launch into this proper, I just want to let you know that we have started a Discord channel. So if you want to keep up with these builds outside of what I share in the videos, I'm putting stuff on there pretty much every day where you can see the progress and we can talk about code. And if you want help with stuff, you can jump in there and I can talk you through stuff, assuming I've got the time, which is not often. In a previous part of this ongoing series, making new gauges for my 350Z, we designed a speedo gauge that, let me just refresh your memory, looks like this. And it has the speed in the middle in a digital number, and then this RPM arc that increases around the outside edge, little red line marker, a numerical representation of the RPM, and the current gear marker at the bottom. And this is quite a cool little design, and it was designed to feel consistent with the existing gauges in the 350Z. Unfortunately, in practice, I don't like it. I put it in my car when I went home over Christmas, just where roughly it's going to go, and I found that not only is it a little bit distracting with that big RPM arc that's constantly moving and it pulls your attention into the periphery, but I don't care about the RPM. It's not something I ever look at. So when I am looking at it just to get a gauge of my speed, my attention is pulled away to the wrong part of it. From a user experience standpoint, it's failing at its task. So I require it to be a bit more minimal. I only show the information on that particular gauge that I want, which is the speed, and maybe a secondary bit of other information that I felt I was looking for all the time on a long journey, which is the amount of fuel that's in the car. But potentially, most importantly, I coded it all wrong. I think a big marker of maturity is being able to say, I made a mistake. And in this, the way I created it, I made a mistake. Let's just take another look. At the time, I was super proud of how I came up with this and the maths function which figure out how to place all of these markers on the gauge, because each one of these markers is actually a tiny 1 degree wide arc. So this is made up of 12 arcs, the inner white one, the thick one, this one over here, and then all these little markers. And I can remember thinking to myself whilst I was developing it, there's got to be an easier way of doing this. Well, it turns out there is, and the developers of LVGL have already thought about it, and I just simply didn't know that this component existed because it's not one of the core ones. It's an additional component, so I didn't see it. But anyway, let me introduce you to Meters. The meter widget, to visualize data in flexible ways, shows arcs, needles, tick lines, and labels. Everything that we need. If we just ignore the how-to, because we're going to go through that in a minute. Look at this. Well done, Andy. You made all of this when it already exists nicely here in LVGL. And as you can see, it's not a core widget. It's one of these extra widgets. So I missed it. So in this video, what I'm going to do is show you the more minimal version of that speedo gauge that I've created that no longer takes my attention away from driving in a negative way. But also we'll look at how you use LVGL's meter component, because it can seem a little bit weird how it's built, but once you've figured it out, it's actually pretty self-explanatory. I guess first things first, I'll show you the new speedo widget that I'm going to be rocking in my 350Z. And bam! There she blows. As we can see, there are some similarities, but there are also a lot of differences. What I've opted to do is this, like I say, big distracting arc around the outside edge, I've done away with. RPM isn't shown on this gauge at all now. I don't know about you guys, but I drive a manual and I don't care about what the RPM is. You know, it's useful, you know, to have a marker, say you're at max, you're going to blow out your engine, change up a gear, but I change gear based on sound and feel. I know when I've got to change gear. I never look at an RPM meter. So getting rid of it, I don't think is a big deal on this little gauge. It's going to be on my main gauge in front of me anyway when we design that. So I don't need it on these little ones. And instead, we stuck with the large numerical representation of the speed in the middle and replaced it with this needle that goes around to show it in a more analog format. What that should hopefully mean is that it's less intrusive and it doesn't draw my attention away, because it's only a little moving thing that I can just see when I'm looking for it, rather than it pulling my attention all the time. Then we've got rid of the gear marker, because again, I'm not going to use that on here. The red line doesn't apply because we don't have RPM. And instead, we've got a secondary little marker at the bottom, which just shows the amount of fuel that I have in a very minimal display. And you can probably just about see it, but there is a little gradient here on the outside of that center bit, just to pull the focus into that center point and just give a bit of a nice aesthetic feel to it, which will make sense when I show you what I've done with the other two gauges that all fall in line with this new UI design. So how did I create this using meters? What the hell are all those different scales that you see on the LVGL Meters documentation all about? Let's jump into it. For the sake of simplicity and for focusing on the thing that we're interested in, I've just removed most of the stuff on the gauge. And this is what a meter looks like in kind of its rawest state. But what we're going to do is go back one step even further from this and then look at how we build it up in its composite steps, because this in the code and seeing these scales and how it's got multiple scales and outlines and all this stuff, I think is the bit that's a little bit confusing for some people about how to use this thing. So let's make it even simpler. This is really a meter in its simplest form. It has a bunch of markers all the way around the outside edge at common intervals, and it has a swing arm in the middle that shows what our current value is, and at the moment we've got it set to 38 miles an hour. A load of stuff I pulled out for this example while we build this. So there's no ESP now, there's no LVGL tick updaters. There's nothing that actually manages this thing. We're just going to look at how we build it from a visual perspective. So what we need is the actual meter itself. So this is our speed meter. Ignore fuel meter, we'll get to that one. And it has an indicator on it. It's the moving part. So in the make speed meter function, which we just call in our setup down the bottom, make speed meter, we create this LV meter and we put it on the active screen. We add a padding of 10 pixels around the outside edge, which just brings it in a little bit. So this is just going to pad all of the outside edge by 10 pixels. We set a black background color. We set a border, because it has a default border on the outside. We set that to be 0 pixels wide. We center it with this LV object center. In the past, I was using LV object align, then putting the component name and then using LV align center like this, but there is actually a shorthand, which is this LV object center, which is much easier. And then just setting the size, so 470 by 470 really for readability. We should have the size first, but whatever. But the bit that gets a little bit confusing is this scale. And the scale is basically the ticks around the outside edge. And they come, I'd say, really in 3 forms. There's the one that is used for a data purpose. So how many points can the swing arm move to? How many degrees can it move to? Then there's the minor ticks and the major ticks. And you can display them both or not. And there's a couple of caveats for them both. So what we do is create a scale. This one's just called scale. And we apply it to the speed meter. And then we set the scale ticks. So when we're making this one, I'm running from 0 to 160 miles per hour. So I want it to be able to show 1 mile an hour increments on where the arm is. Like, I don't want it to jump from 0 to 5 to 10 to 15 and like have those as individual positions. I want it to smoothly move all the way around. So we need a tick or a scale tick at every 1 mile an hour increment. So to go from 0 to 160 is 161 ticks, because there's 1 for every mile an hour plus 0. So we create this scale ticks. So we apply it to scale meter. We're running on scale, and it has 161 ticks. And the next bit is, what do those ticks look like? So for me, I've set them to 0 and 0, which means they have no width, which is the first value, 0, and no height, which is the second value, 0, and the palette white. And the palette doesn't matter at this point. I guess we could put null in there because it doesn't apply. I don't know if null works. If it does, we'll leave it in there. If not, we'll just set it back. But I don't want to show 161 little tick markers because it's too busy. In fact, let me show you what that looks like. If we get rid of the major ticks here and just set this one to be the same. So 1 pixel wide and 10 pixels high. And let's make it white. And upload that. We'll see that, in my opinion at least, that is way too busy. There's 161 individual miles per hour markers there. And I just think it's a bit over the top. So instead of showing every tick, we want to show every X tick, every second, every third, every fourth, whatever it might be, depending on how busy or not busy you want your design to be. For me, I chose every other one. So there's a tick every 2 miles per hour. So if we just bring this back down to 0, 0, and that to, again, let's just see if null works. What this next line is, set the major ticks, is going to do is you can use it to show increment markers along your scale. So when we have things like a marker at 10 and 20 and 30, that would be how you do this. So again, we play it to speed meter, we set the scale. The first number is like your stride. What nth number from the scale are you going to make major numbers? So 2 will mean every second one. So at 0, 2, 4, 6, and so on. They'll all be marked as major ticks. If we change it to 5, it would be 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, and so on. Then the next 2 numbers, again, are the design. So 1 and 10 is 1 pixel wide, 10 pixels long. The next one is the color. So we've made them white. In my final design, they're not white, but it's easier to see. We made them white. And then the minus 150 is a trick I'm having to do because by default, a major tick has also got the number in a written format associated to it. So if I set that to 0 and show you what that looks like, you'll see why I've not got it. Turns out you can't use null there. You have to use a color. So it's just put white back in there, though it doesn't matter. And though it's difficult to see, this is why. If we look real close, you see all the numbers all the way around the outside edge. So every single major tick has got the number on. So 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, all the way around to 160. Obviously, they're in a dark font at the moment just due to how I've got it designed. But as you can see, pretty chaotic. So this final number is an offset. It's an offset in. So if I was to set it to 20, it would move all those numbers inwards by 20. So they offset from where they are by default. By putting it to minus 150, it's a big enough number that it means they've actually just been shifted all the way off the outside edge of the screen, so you never see them. So it's just a little hack to allow me to have the markers show every 2, but actually not just show the numbers with it. And then we need to set the range, and it's similar but not exactly the same as how arcs work. So we set the range is going to start from 0. It's going to go to 160. The total angle of the meter is 270. So this is 270 degrees, which is 3/4 of a circle. And it starts with an offset of 135 degrees. So 3 o'clock, right-hand side, is 0, 90 degrees to the very bottom. And then because it's 270 degrees, we need to go another 45 degrees to get the start point. So it's 90 plus 45, which is 135. And that sets that meter. But I want to have some like major markers. So I want to mark every 20 miles an hour on the way around the outside edge. So how do I do that? Well, let's unsecret this bit of code. We've got a second scale, which we apply to the same meter. So this one is the scale and it's the 20s, and we add it to the same meter in exactly the same way. But this one, instead of having 161 individual points, only has 9. So it has 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, 120, 140, 160, and 0. So it has 9 markers. And again, these are 0, 0. They're just hidden. The reason is because I want the numbers this time. So I want the numbers to appear at the markers. And in order to get the numbers, it needs to be a major tick, because only major ticks have got the numbers associated to them. So if I was to get rid of this major ticks line and then show this in the same way, so let's just do that, 2 and 15. So these are slightly bigger. So they're 2 pixels wide and 15 pixels long, slightly larger markers. If I was to just do that and set that, we end up with this, which looks kind of cool. You've got all of the small markers, and then every 20, so every 10th marker, we've got the additional one for 20 miles an hour, 40, 60, 80, all the way up to 160. But I want the numbers in there, and this normal ticks doesn't show the numbers, only major ticks shows the numbers. So instead, I don't show these minor ticks. I just keep that at 0, 0. And I set the major ticks to be 2 and 15. And 1 means that it shows every one, every nth one, because there's only 9 placeholders. If I'd done this, you could do this another way and say, okay, there's 161 markers on this one also that don't show, and I want it to show every 20. And that would achieve exactly the same thing. But you're creating more work for LVGL than it needs to do. Why make it create 161 markers and move every 20, when in reality, it only needs to move 9, and then the major marker is every single one of them is a major marker. So then we make that white, and we do a 30 offset, which brings the font in a little bit more than it would be. So it's not on top of the line, it's in a bit. Then again, we set that range, and the range is exactly the same as it was on the previous one, because it starts and finishes all in exactly the same spot. You can have them offset if you want, but we're not doing that. So putting all this together looks like this. There we go. Again, pretty much the same, except the font is on the inside, but it is obviously, this is the default font that it comes for. It's like quite dark, it's quite small. I have a replacement font that I want to use. So we can set the style of that font. With this, I've already got a font loaded in that I want to use. It's Ubuntu 24 pixel, and we're going to apply it on the speed meter to the ticks. So this is the font we're applying to the ticks, and we'll also set that font color. So very simply, when we upload this one, just make them have a consistent font and a nice bright white color. And the 2 miles an hour one, I'm just going to change to palette dark gray, because I just want them to be really subtle just in the background. Let's just throw those couple of style changes up. There we go. We've got the font using Ubuntu in a nice bright white, so it's easier to see. The major markers, the 9 major markers on the scale 20s are all white, and then the minor one at the back, the 160 that we show every other one, is dark gray. So that shows up really nice. It's just a bit more subtle. And this needle, as it's called, is very simple. We just create a new type here. So we've got this meter indicator type, and we call that speed indicator because that's what it is. And then we add a needle line to the speed meter that works on what scale does it attach to. So we are attaching, this is why we have to do the 161. So it attaches to that 161 scale, and its design is it's 5 pixels wide. So it automatically goes from the very middle all the way to the very outside edge. Its color is red, and then -10 offsets the outside edge. So how far does it want to come in from the outside? So -10 just brings it in a little bit, just is a little bit more aesthetic. Now, you don't have to have a needle. You can have an indicator like we had before. I'll just show you roughly how to do that, but this will be our indicator example. So let's call it indicator example. So we'll create that. So the indicator example is on speed meter. It uses scale. This example will be 15 pixels wide. We'll make it amber. And it's got an offset come in a bit. So let's offset it by 20. It doesn't really matter. Then where is it going to start and where is it going to end? So if you're going to do one like we did in the original design, which had 0 always being 0 and then the arc fills as it goes around, you would have this locked. So this would stay locked as 0, and then you would vary this end value. So if we put that to a little bit below where our needle is at the moment, our needle is at 38. So let's put it to 35, and you just see the difference between the two. And there you go. You've got a indicator that's locked at 0 and goes up to 35. But as you can see, I gave it an offset of 20, which has pulled it outwards. If you wanted to have it further in, you would give it an offset of like minus something. But we're not going to use it at all, so it doesn't really matter. So you can use that indicator for visualizing data. So this is the value that the meter is at, or you can just use it for aesthetic purposes. And that's what I've done here. So if we just put this one back on, I have this meter, which is called outline, and it's on my meter. It's 2 pixels wide, it's white, and it's offset outwards by 2 pixels. And it starts at 0 and runs around to 160. So very simply, puts a 2 pixel border around the outside edge of my meter, which looks like this, which I really like. I think that's a nice, pretty minimal, but, you know, informative looking gauge. But I don't want to be able to see this all the way to the middle, and you can't offset this center point up. So how do we make it so it only looks like a segment moving around the outside edge? And really, it's just a hack. Let me just throw the code in here. What we do is create an inner circle. So we're basically creating a big black circle that sits on top, and it just hides the needle. But as you saw at the start, I wanted a glow to come out from the outside edge, and it's not really a glow. It's a drop shadow that happens to be lighter, and this is the code that makes that. So we create a circle, which is just a basic object. It's 200 by 200 pixels wide, and we throw it in the very center of the screen. We set its color to be black, its background opacity to be cover, which means 100% cover the thing behind it. It's got a radius, which is the radius circle, which is basically a 50% radius. And then we set a border width of 1, so it's got a 1 pixel wide border around the outside edge. Again, just an aesthetic choice that I went for. The border color is gray. I have a medium gray that I use. And it's got a shadow width. So a shadow starts dark and goes out to light. It's 80 pixels wide. So it's an 80 pixel wide shadow around the outside edge. And that shadow's color is, again, that same gray. So this to this kind of merged together really nicely. When we put that on, so a circle that covers some of the arc, so it's a bit more subtle in the background, and it's got this shadow glow gradient that comes out from the center. Cool. And that's like the majority of the complexity of using meters. The only other thing that you really might want to see as part of using this is how do you then set the value. And you do it depending on the type, if you've gone for the needle type or the indicator type. If you were to use the needle type like I have, we go to my function where I set it, update speed, set the indicator value of that speed indicator to the new speed. It's dead simple. If we were going to do it as one of the arcs, much like you saw at the bottom here with that indicator value end, if if we had a update speed function and it was updating it so it was like getting wider and smaller like we did in the original design, we would have meter set indicator end value. So it would be, you know, when we did it, we called it indicator example, and you would set that to the new speed. So then your 0 would stay, your bottom end would stay locked at 0, and your top end would move and it would create a bigger and smaller arc. It's exactly the same. But we're using needle, so we do it this way. But that's really everything to do with meters. The thing that is, I think, a little bit confusing if you haven't used it before is this scale, and the fact that you can use multiple scales on a single meter. That took me a moment to get used to. But also the fact that you can optimize on using these ticks and the major ticks in unison to create some things that are quite cool looking. Now, on this full design, I have a couple of other elements, which I just throw everything back on the gauge now, and we can just take a look at those other couple of small bits. So this is it with everything on there. There are a couple of extra little elements. We've got in the middle the speed in the numerical value. This is the one I really find that I use, and a miles per hour label. They're just simply that. They're just labels in exactly the same way as we did in the first iteration of this gauge, but using a slightly different font. Then we have this arc at the bottom, and this one isn't a meter. This one is an arc because it keeps the design really nice and simple. And I like the subtlety of how it shows. But like I said, it has a nice little warning thing that I can do. So if I update the fuel here to 8% fuel and upload that, we'll see a change happen, which I really like from an aesthetic perspective. So there, when it gets to below 10%, the little icon goes red, just as a way of alerting me, Andy, get your ass to a petrol station. And that whole arc at the bottom is, like I said, just an arc like we've created before. So set the size, the rotation, the angle, the range. So this one goes from 0 to 100%. It's centered in the middle, and this one's reversed because usually the arc wants to go clockwise, anti-clockwise. It wants to go clockwise, and we want it to go anti-clockwise. So we reverse it, set the styles and the colors and blah, 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 blah. And then we just create an icon which sits above it, which is a fuel symbol. There's a whole subset of how we actually create symbols and use them in here using Font Awesome. I'll create another video on that if you want. Let me know if you want a thing on how to actually import and use symbols, because it's a little bit tricky, but we can make another video on that. But it's just an icon that's sat on top. And then the setting the value here, we pull in that value, we set the arc to the value as a percentage, dead easy. And then if it's below a certain range, so if it's lower than 10, make the indicator red and make the line red. If it's under 25, make the icon its regular gray, but the arc amber. So it's like, it slightly draws your attention, but not fully having the thing lit up yet. And then if it's normal, if it's above 25%, just keep the arc white and the meter gray. So what I like about this design and the minimalistic approach is that it's very easy to then use this as kind of like a style guideline for my other two gauges that need to sit alongside them. And they have also been designed. So I'm going to put all three together, and you can see the three gauges that are going to appear in my 350Z all together for the first time, and see what you think. Let's take a look. And here you go. The three gauges together at last. In the middle, we have the speed gauge, which I've just been showing you. Over here, we have some kind of general information. So time and date, this is actually correct as of right now. The GPS and weather and informative sender is just ticking away on the windowsill to the side of me. So that time is coming through correctly. We might see it change. But the CAN bus detector isn't connected. So these two side ones and the bottom one, they've got no values at the moment. But we have the oil pressure up the left-hand side, which goes from 0 to 120, which is the OEM values. And then the water temperature up the right-hand side, which again goes from 0 to 120, but in degrees this time. And then on the bottom, another one of those arcs just to keep the design style to feel consistent. But this one has a battery level from 0 to 16 volts. So I know where it should roughly sit when I'm actually getting this information from the canvas. Then we have my current location. So this changes every 30 seconds based on where I am when I'm moving. What the weather's like outside. It is currently sunny, and it is currently sunny, but it is cold. So I did this one from -15 to 45, just so I could keep all the ticks the same. So there's 4 ticks on each one of these side markers. So this one's the outside temperature, and then the rain for the next hour. How many millimeters of rain are there expected to be over the next hour? So 0 is not expected to rain. So this is just another general information one. Again, these are just keeping quite minimal and having the information that I find useful having in those 3 dials. Obviously, I need an RPM gauge. Obviously, I need to have information about check engine lights and all the other really important informative stuff. But I don't need it in those 3 little gauges that just sit at the top of my center console. All that information will go in the big major gauge in front of me when we design that next. These just need to give me a glimpsed snapshot of what's going on and really just allow me to see the speed. If all 3 of these gauges were deleted and I just had speed in all 3 of them, and that was the only thing that they showed, that would be fine, because that's really the only thing I ever look at when I'm looking at those gauges. But just to have a few bits of key information on there, I think is a good thing. But again, not in a way that's going to ever be distracting. They're not going to pull my eyes. From a user experience perspective, that minimalistic design is a lot more pleasing. I think when you see it actually inside here in the 3 spots, you'll understand why I've made the decisions I have. So there you go, an introduction to meters in LVGL, why they're actually really useful. They're definitely better than using arcs for this. So if you saw my previous video on how to make gauges, don't follow it. Follow this one. It's much better. And once you start to come up with a design language, it's dead easy to then start to get some of these like consistent styles and things that you want and put them potentially into a library. That's what I'm going to do with this. So at the time I release this video, this code to create these will not be available. If you are watching this video at some point in the future after I've released this video, then there's a good chance the code for these is going to be in a repo. Just check the description. If I've released it, it'll be linked there. And I'm actually going to create a design library for this where you can just attach the library and then change a couple of small values, but then apply this and design and this scaling to whatever you want. So you can just throw it an icon, throw it a range, and it will just build everything for you. I hope that's helped if you've been thinking about using meters in LVGL and understanding what it all means. Let me know if you've got any questions or comments. Like I said at the start of the video, if you want to keep up with some of these builds outside of the videos, we've now got a Discord. Link is in the description if you want to join. Sharing stuff there daily, talk about coding, bit debugging, loads of stuff. So we've got some cool makers in the channel already sharing some stuff that we're working on as we move forwards. Otherwise, I'd love to know what you think of the new design. Do you like it? Do you like the minimal compared to the angry orange of the previous one? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, that's it for this one. Whatever you do with the rest of your day, folks, have a wicked one, and I'll see you in the next video. Take it easy, peeps. Bye-bye.